Come to the urgent question. Chris Philp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I ask the Home Secretary to make a statement on the recent increase in dangerous, illegal and unnecessary channel crossings by small boat?
Mr. Speaker, for too long smuggling gangs have been undermining our border security and putting lives at risk, which is why the new government has made it a top priority to address the crisis we inherited. And let us be clear about what that crisis entailed. Small boat crossings in the first half of the year at their highest point on record, and over 100,000 arrivals in the 5 years prior. Over 200,000 cases stuck in the asylum system, costing the taxpayer billions in support, and 700 million spent on a gimmick that sent just 4 volunteers to Rwanda. When we entered government, we said it was time for grip, not gimmicks, and that is exactly what we are delivering. Since July, we have established the Border Security Command, headed up by experienced Police Chief Martin Hewitt. In the King's Speech, we set out our intention to bring forward legislation to give the border security system stronger powers to investigate and prosecute organised immigration crime. We're recruiting 100 new specialist agency and investigation officers at the National Crime Agency to target and dismantle the criminal networks behind this phenomenon. And we have announced an extra £75 million to bolster border security, bringing our investment in the Border Security Command over the next 2 years to £150 million. This government's border security funding will go towards a range of enforcement and intelligence activities and capabilities, including covert technology, as well as hundreds of staff and specialist investigators as we crank up the pressure on the smuggling gangs. This is an international problem requiring international solutions. Since the general election, we have intensified cooperation with partners overseas. We recently struck a new anti-smuggling action plan with G7 partners, and the Prime Minister and Home Secretary both attended the Interpol General Assembly in Glasgow on Monday to press the case for a much stronger and more integrated global response to organised immigration crime. As well as tackling this issue upstream, we've taken action to speed up decision-making and stepped up returns of those with no right to be in this country. The result of all this action is 9,400 returns since this government took office, including a 19% increase in enforced returns and a 14% increase in returns of foreign national offenders. Mr. Speaker, sticking plasters and gimmicks have failed. The smugglers and traffickers have been getting away with it for far too long. It's time to show them we're serious, not with words, but with action. The security of Britain's borders is paramount, and under this government, it always will be.
Shadow Leader of the House, Chris.
Shadow Home Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm afraid the government's actions belie the reality. Since they came to office, 17,520 people have crossed the English Channel, more than twice the number they've removed. That is 1.5 times the number in the previous 4 months, and it is 15% more than the same period last year. In October alone, last month, 5,417 people crossed. That is 3 times higher than last October. And tragically, since this government came to office, 50 people have lost their lives or have gone missing. That is more than the previous 18 months put together. And tragically, that includes 16 women and children. Now, this government they chose to cancel the Rwanda scheme before it had even started. The first flight was due to take off, I believe, from memory, on the 24th of July, but they cancelled it. Now, had they allowed that flight to go ahead, had they allowed the scheme to continue, the deterrent effect would by now have started. And we know it works. We know it works because it worked in Australia under their Operation Sovereign Borders about 10 years ago. We know the deterrent effect of returns works because it worked with Albania, where we secured a 93% reduction in arrivals. And don't take my word for it, the National Crime Agency said that law enforcement alone is not enough and you need an effective removal scheme in order to deter crossings. Their announcements in Glasgow on Monday are simply not enough, and they simply repeat work underway already. But it's not just the NCA and me saying we need a returns deterrent. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen encouraged member states just a few weeks ago to develop their own returns hubs outside of the EU. So will she follow Ursula von der Leyen's advice and urgently implement offshore processing? Might I also draw attention to the success Belgium has had in stopping boats by the shore? Will she ask France to do the same? And finally, Mr Speaker, because of their failings, Labour is breaking their manifesto pledge to end hotel use. So will she pledge not to open any more hotels?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I say, first of all, in welcoming him to his new front bench position, what a pleasure it is to be opposite him. And I'm going to look forward to jousting with him over the years. On Rwanda, from when it began to when we scrapped it, during that period, 83,500 people crossed in small boats. If that's a deterrent, then I think the honourable gentleman has got a peculiar view of what the meaning of deterrence is in the English language. Now, obviously, Mr Speaker, when I realised we were doing this UQ, I took the opportunity of having a look at his record as a Home Office minister. And while he was a minister at the Home Office, for his first stint, during his first stint at the Home Office, September 2019 to 2021, 23,849 people crossed the Channel on small boats. When he was, during his second ministerial sojourn at the Home Office, 50,637 people crossed the Channel in small boats. So his overall total is 74,486. He was saying in September 2021, the honourable member for Croydon South answered one of these UQs, and I'm quoting him here. He said, "This government," meaning the last government, "will not rest until we've taken the necessary steps to completely end these crossings." How did that go, Mr Speaker?
Mike Tapp.
2018, 400 crossed the Channel. Since then, over 140,000 have crossed, the majority of which were on the party opposite's watch. And all they could introduce were ridiculous gimmicks like Rwanda, which cost the taxpayers millions of pounds. Does the Minister agree that the new injection of cash into the Border Security Command is a better use of taxpayers' money than the gimmicks the party opposite introduced?
Yes, Mr Speaker, I agree wholeheartedly with that. The issue here is dealing with cross-border organised immigration crime, and to do that, you have to, Mr Speaker, talk to your international allies and cooperate with them cross-border. That is exactly what the creation of the Border Security Command will do, both operationally and politically, and we will see the results.
We now come to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to join the Minister in welcoming the new Shadow Home Secretary to his place. Leading with the chin on the first full day in the job is an interesting approach, but if any situation highlights the manifest failings of the last Conservative government, it is surely this. We in this House, Mr Speaker, all want to stop the dangerous Channel crossings, and I'm afraid the last government totally failed at this, so I really am surprised we are discussing this today. The asylum backlog ballooned under the Tories, and the human beings we are talking about who are in these small boats are often victims to smuggling and trafficking gangs who profit on human suffering. So does the Minister agree that it is therefore imperative that we work closer than ever before in coordination with Europol and our French counterparts to smash these criminal networks? I urge the government, while I'm on my feet, Mr Speaker, to address the root causes of this problem, not just the symptoms. We must empower the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office to provide robust aid to regions in an increasingly unstable world.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The honourable lady is exactly right. This isn't about gimmicks. It's not about having a parallel immigration policy that's unconnected with any of the treaties we've signed or international law. It's about doing the day job and making sure that you don't leave your you inherit a government a 200,000 person backlog because you hadn't been doing the day job. The issue with small boat crossings is to deal with organised, internationally focused immigration crime, which is often originated in countries very far away. We have to cooperate with the forces of law and order and operationally across borders to tackle this, and that is what this government is determined to do.
Shaun Davies.
Can I welcome the government's approach on this issue? A 23% increase in enforced removals compared to last summer, and agree with the Minister that the way to deal with this issue is to smash the criminal gangs. Can I urge her, though, to consider what attention she gives to the Shadow Home Secretary, who, when he was the Home Office Minister, imposed hotels on my constituency and was the Chief Secretary of State to Liz Truss during the mini-budget?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think that the honourable gentleman's record in office is a matter that we may well keep coming back to. I agree with the observations that my honourable friend has made.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Curran Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Everybody in this House wants to see an end to small boat crossings and the risk that people put themselves at to cross the Channel. She's announced a number of measures this week. Would she give an assessment of when she expects those measures to start to see a reduction in crossings, and will she commit to keeping the Select Committee informed of progress?
Minister.
Well, it's my first chance, Mr Speaker, to congratulate the Right Honourable Lady on her chairing of the Select Committee, and as always I look forward to coming before her whenever she feels she wishes to talk to me, and certainly the department, I know, wish to keep her informed about what is going on. I think there's been a significant shift in international cooperation with the G7 collaboration on smuggling, with the European political community dialogues, and there's a meeting tomorrow where we hope there'll be some announcements. And also the government's been working on bilateral memorandums of understandings and action plans across Europe to achieve a step change in cooperation cross-border, which is the key to beginning to tackle this awful criminal smuggling activity.
Chris Murray. Mr Wilde.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the 5 years before the election, I worked on preventing human trafficking in Scotland, including with many of the victims who came on small boat crossings. They have gone through the most appalling abuse that chills the soul. Does the Minister agree with me that public money is far better spent on smashing the gangs and freeing the victims than it is in a Rwanda plan that was never going to work?
Yes, Mr Speaker, I agree profoundly with my honourable friend, which is why the new government has changed tack in this area, and I'm sure we will see the results in due course.
Mr Speaker, the government has pledged millions of pounds to smashing the gang on top of the millions of pounds that we spent on stopping boats. The government has pledged more drones on the Channel and fast-tracking of cases, like we deployed drones on the Channel and fast-tracked cases. The government has set up a border security command, which sounds remarkably similar to the small boats operational command that we set up when in government. What, other than scrapping the one thing that would have worked, i.e. the deterrent, has this government done that is different, that is actually going to stop the boats?
Well, firstly, the Border Security Command is completely different operationally to the command on the Channel, which is deliberately there to try to save life and find out what's going on the water. Operationally, the Border Security Command will cooperate across borders in a much different way. And if I were the Right Honourable Lady, I wouldn't be boasting about the morass of colossal wasted expenditure that the Rwanda scheme represented. £700 million down the drain, with plans to spend nearly £10 billion over the next few years on that plan. It was a gross waste of money which didn't deter a single boat crossing.
Holly Billington.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The gangs who run this vile trade care only for their own profits, not for the lives that they put at risk. Will the Minister reassure this House and my constituents of East Thanet that everything that will be done by the Border Security Command to break the evil smuggling gangs and bring the ringleaders to justice?
Minister.
Yes, that is the point of the increase in operational cooperation cross borders, so that if we can't bring people to justice in our jurisdiction, we can ensure that information is swapped in real time so that these people can be brought to justice in other jurisdictions. There's going to be a step change in that kind of international cooperation, which will deliver results.
James Cleverly.
Will she describe clearly, without bluster, unambiguously, the difference in function between the Border Security Command and the Small Boats Operation Command?
Mr. Speaker, the Border Security Command isn't only focused on channel crossings. It's much more about using our intelligence capabilities and our operational arm to cooperate cross borders in other jurisdictions in real time to ensure that organised criminal gangs can be tracked and apprehended so that they can be dismantled. And the thing is that we have given now 150 million extra to the Border Security Command to start doing this work, whereas the command on the Channel is about saving lives and cooperating with the French once people have reached the beaches. It's far too late once people have reached the beaches. We need to go far back to the origin countries and do a lot more work there.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister acknowledge the real concerns felt by people in the UK and in my city of Portsmouth around the small boat crossings? And, Mr. Speaker, does the Minister agree that the recent 23% increase in enforced returns of people who have no right to be here compared to last summer shows what can be done when grown-ups are in the room and when a government focuses on getting agreement?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I agree absolutely with the points that my honourable friend has just made.
Mr. Speaker, there are 120 conflicts globally. This and other factors such as poverty, food insecurity, the effects of climate change cause populations to move. Does the Minister agree that it is essential, as my honourable friend pointed out, that we look at the root causes of immigration, and therefore does she support an increase in the development and aid budget rather than the cut in ODA in the budget last week?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the end, any work we can do upstream, whether it's development work or aid, is going to deal with some of the causes, and the honourable lady is right to point out what some of those are. However, we have to stay within the bounds set by the budget, but I can assure her that I regard prevention as much better than cure.
Mr. Strafford.
Inherited a situation on our borders that was failing on all fronts. Record numbers of tragic deaths in the Channel, millions wasted on the failed Rwanda gimmick, and criminal gangs profiteering off exploiting our borders. Can the Minister reassure my constituents that, unlike the previous government, we won't waste time on political gimmicks, but will focus on the practical measures that can bring an end to the persistence of these damning failures?
Mr. Speaker, I can assure my honourable friend that we will do exactly that, and that's why we've seen a step change in returns since this government took office. 9,400 in that period, including a 19% increase in enforced returns and a 14% increase in returns of foreign national offenders. We will ensure that our immigration system has integrity, Mr.
Speaker, sometimes when you listen to exchanges between the Labour front bench and the Conservatives, you actually forget that we are dealing with real people fleeing the most unimaginable horrors. So can I ask the Minister, other than this berserk Rwanda plan, why is she continuing with the same failed approach as the Tories? They continue to spend millions on hotels, drones, various bits of high tech. How about trying something different? How about looking at safe and legal routes to smash the gang? And how about showing some compassion?
I'm not going to get into a competition with the honourable gentleman about compassion. We have a duty to ensure that people that come to our shores who are asylum seekers are properly processed and dealt with and integrated into our society if that is granted. But what I'm not going to do, despite the honourable gentleman chuntering away, is stand here and say that we're going to let people smugglers for money exploiting people decide who comes to our country. We have to stop this trade. That is not at odds with treating those who arrive here with compassion.
Joe White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I stood for election on the 4th of July this year, my commitment to my voters is that we would smash the criminal gangs and stop the small boats. At that point in time, the number of small boat crossings was 6% higher than the worst ever year of 2022. Does the Minister welcome with me that that data, compared to 2022, we are now 9,000 lower than what we were then?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, but I think the House has to have patience. There are no magic wands to wave in this area, and there are no fantasy policies now we've gotten rid of the Rwanda scheme. What there is hard, day-to-day operational work to try to get the system we inherited, which is in complete chaos with huge backlogs, back into some kind of order so that we can run it properly, fairly and efficiently, and that is what we are focusing on.
Andrew Snow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I recently listened to an interview with a retired former Inspector of Borders and Immigration who was responding to the announcements the government has made, and his concerns that he outlined were that the measures in their own right, without an effective deterrent, he was concerned about what impact they will actually have and how the government is going to measure the success of the announcements that have been made in terms of the percentage or volume of small boat crossings that they want to see reduced for the announcements they've made. So can the Minister confirm, as a result of the announcements that were made, what percentage reduction in small boats the government would view as success?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not getting into a numbers game in this House. We are trying to deal with a trade that was allowed to become established on the previous government's watch, which has been industrialised on the previous government's watch, which we are now trying to dismantle. I'm not going to stand here and say it will happen overnight, but we will make progress.
Red Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And folks in Plymouth are really interested in how the government is going to solve this big problem. They will welcome the increase in money towards this problem and the increase in returns. But another thing they want is constructive, lively debate with ideas in this place. Unfortunately, the opposition seems so devoid of ideas, Mr. Speaker. They're going to bang on for another 4 years about a failed scheme that got firmly rejected by the electorate. This was their landmark policy, Stop the Boats, Rwanda. It was rejected firmly. Does the Minister agree with me that the first sign of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the Home Office annual report, it is confirmed that for 2022-3, £3 billion was spent on hotel costs for illegal migrants, averaging £8 million a day. The cruel inheritance tax assault on British family farms and businesses is estimated to eventually raise £520 million per year. Does this Labour government need to urgently rethink its spending priorities?
No, Mr. Speaker. We've just had a budget that we're in the middle of debating and voting on, and I expect that that will be the way we go forwards.
Bella Neal.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. The 23% increase in returns of people who have no right to be here is a really positive step in giving the public confidence in our systems. Can I ask the Minister what measures are in place to continue to ensure that our processes remain robust and that the trajectory of returns continues?
Well, we are ensuring that the enforcement part of the Home Office that deals with returns is given the resources it needs to do that job. But in order to make it even more successful, we have to engage with those countries where we wish to return people so that we can have papers issued. And again, the significant shift in international cooperation is what will deliver that.
If Rwanda was a gimmick, why are Germany, Austria, Bulgaria, Cyprus, the Netherlands, Poland and Romania looking at similar schemes? And given the number of crossings and deaths in the Channel, would it not, with hindsight, have been wise to at least allow the Rwanda scheme a trial run?
They aren't considering a Rwanda scheme, Mr. Speaker. They are all saying that they are going to stay within the confines of international law. The Rwanda scheme definitely tore up international law, and it was planned to spend nearly £10 billion up until 2027 on trying to remove 250 people a week from this country and spending nearly £3 billion on extra detention camps for them in this country. I don't think that represents British values or good value for money.
Lawrence Stern.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Given that only 3% of people who arrived by small boat between 2018 and June 2024 have been returned, a period of reflection from the Conservative Party on this issue would be welcome. Does she agree that the government that dispenses with gimmicks and focuses on the day job is delivering that progress on returns?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, but don't underestimate the fact that under the Illegal Migration Act, nobody who arrived in that way could be processed. So there are 118,000 people waiting to be processed because they stopped the system dead. We have to get the system going and process going again, which is what we are doing, so we can get the flow of decisions, return those who aren't entitled to be here, and integrate those who are.
So, Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has a mandate for trying out its approach, and I wish it well. Personally, I've always felt that unless the boats are intercepted and turned back near the start of their journey, nothing will deter the people from using that method. But can the Minister, who I respect greatly, explain to us how it's possible to smash gangs that operate in other jurisdictions once they get to the point where they withdraw their headquarters to countries where there is no possibility of cooperation with the authorities in charge of those states?
Well, getting to that level of withdrawal would be a fantastic development, which would put incredible pressure on a lot of the supply lines that are currently being used. So if we could get to that stage, I think we would already have made significant progress. And the answer to what the Right Honourable Gentleman is talking about is international cooperation to put the maximum pressure on this internationally terrible trade in human lives and exploitation. And I'm glad that he's giving me a little bit of time to prove that we can make a difference.
Sarah Coombs.
Mr. Speaker, people in West Brom are appalled by these criminal smuggling gangs. Does the Minister agree with me that the last government wasted £700 million on the totally failed Rwanda scheme? And could she set out how this new government is going to fix the situation?
Wasted.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and it's the repurposing of some of that money and resource which hasn't been lost, which is funding the new approach.
Shoka Kadam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister agree with me that the loss of life is colossally too high on this channel crossings, including the loss of a 2-year-old child just the other week? Would the Minister agree with me that we should reopen safe routes so we can treat those that are coming to this country with dignity and respect that they deserve?
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that safe routes would stop people attempting to come over the channel in small boats. So I have some sympathy with the idea of safe routes, but I don't think it would stop this trade. For example, 1,500 Indians came across, and we have a visa regime with the Indians. The highest nationality for small boat arrivals this year is the Vietnamese. Again, this is not about people who are always asylum seekers coming over. It's people who wouldn't have a right to be here but are paying to come here. So safe routes does not solve that problem.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Shadow Home Secretary in their remarks earlier referred to the lives lost in the Channel, every single one of them a tragedy. But does the Minister agree with me that, as the Shadow Home Secretary appeared to do, trying to make a political point about those deaths, is frankly beneath the party opposite, as were gimmicks like the Rwanda scheme?
Yes, I agree. Obviously, the loss of life in the Channel this year has been the highest on record, and that is because more pressure is being put on the gangs, the boats are being overloaded, there's more anarchy on the beaches in France, and those are all things that we have to try to deal with in cooperation with our French colleagues.
My constituents want to see an end to the small boat crossings and also an end to the use of hotels for asylum seekers, something that was pledged in the government's manifesto. I'd like to ask the Minister, where hotels have seen asylum seekers moved out, will she undertake to ensure that more are not put back in?
Mr. Speaker, the issue with hotels and other dispersed accommodation is that we've inherited a backlog because of the way that the party opposite ran the system. There was no processing done of asylum seekers who then had to be put up in hotels. Hotels are a temporary, not a solution that's not something we want to deal with, and we will do our best to get out of hotels as quickly as possible by getting the system up and running, processing those who are making claims so that we can get them either approved and integrated or returned.
Alex Barringer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the government came to power earlier this year, it was the worst year on record for small boats crossings, 6% higher than the last year on record. In 2022. This was a legacy of chaos left by the last government. While there is no room for complacency, will the Minister agree with me that we should be welcoming a 20% lower level of small boats crossings this year as compared to 2022?
I agree that the first 6 months of this year were the worst on record. There was then a quiet 3 months, and now there's been a huge increase, not least because of benign weather conditions. So I don't want to be getting into monthly figures. I think what we've got to do is bear down on the organised criminality that is perpetrating this trade so that we can disrupt it and deal with it that way.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister recognise there's a distinct lack of humanity about this whole debate and the discussion surrounding small boats and migration? Does she not recognise that those people that risk all to get into those very dangerous boats and cross the Channel are doing so out of an act of desperation? And by the lack of a safe route system across Europe, it's created a market for people traffickers. Doesn't she think it's necessary, instead of this approach, to actually look seriously at having safe routes for asylum seekers, which will avoid the tragedy of all these deaths in the Channel and, for that matter, in the Mediterranean?
I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, that safe routes wouldn't stop all the Channel crossings. There's now an industrialised system run by organised immigration criminals dealing with this. The Vietnamese would never have a safe route into the UK. There's no visa system, and yet they are now 20% of the people crossing on small boats. So I don't think, with all due respect to the Right Honourable Gentleman, that safe routes would solve the problem.
Jessica Tell.
Mr. Speaker, the last government was responsible for an asylum backlog so large that they ended up spending millions of pounds of taxpayers' money every day on asylum hotels, including in my constituency in Bournemouth West. As the Minister has said, we are now dealing with that legacy. And can I welcome her statement? And does she agree with me that we'll take no lessons from the party opposite and will continue to make progress towards our manifesto commitments to bring down the backlog and end hotel use?
Mr. Speaker, I couldn't have put it better myself.
Gregory Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think there's unanimity around the House that this is a moral issue. When I raised the issue of deterrent with the Home Secretary on the 22nd of July, at the last statement, she seemed to agree with me that we needed to have a deterrent. Since then, the government doesn't seem to have brought forward any specific deterrents. So will she look at, if not the Rwanda scheme, the schemes that other European nations are looking at to see if we can deter the small boats crossings?
Excellent question.
The way to deter the small boats crossings, Mr. Speaker, is to deal with those who are organising and profiting from this immoral trade, and that is what we are doing.
Colin Naismith.
Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Home Secretary and the benches opposite are still banging the drum for the failed Rwanda gimmick. Does the Minister agree with me that if the previous government were so confident that that policy was going to work, they would not have called an election before that theory could be put to the test?
I think my honourable friend makes an intriguing point, since the party opposite have said repeated times from the benches over there that they were just about to start it the week after the election, then all of a sudden it was all going to work and be perfect. After 83,500 people crossed the small boats knowing the Rwanda scheme was legislated for and in place, I suspect somehow that the date of the election might have had a bit to do with the fact that they realised the Rwanda scheme was going to fail.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is claiming credit for an increase in deportations of people who have no right to be in this country. So I want an exact or an approximate figure, please, Mr. Speaker, of how many of these 9,400 people have been sent back since the Labour government come in have actually arrived here on small boats since 2018.
Mr. Speaker, since the party opposite processed virtually nobody who came over on a small boat, they're still in the asylum backlog system that we're attempting to deal with.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
I'm pleased to see this government taking swift action to tackle the small boats crisis, including scrapping the Rwanda scheme, which was not only ludicrously expensive, but inhumane and ineffective. Can the Minister confirm that it is possible to manage our borders in a way that is both effective and humane, and that we will do that?
Mr. Speaker, that is certainly the balance that this government is aiming to achieve.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister has said that her policy to smash the criminal gangs will reduce the number of migrants crossing the Channel. Can she give the House her estimation of when that policy will start to work?
Mr. Speaker, I said in answer to an earlier question that there are no magic wands in this area, that it's hard, tough, operational processing and cooperation internationally that will begin to bear down on this. It's work by the National Crime Agency, it's work by prosecutorial authorities, often cross borders in different jurisdictions. So the fact that we've made such a good start in terms of international cooperation and the significant shift in attention here will bear down on this. But I'm not going to stand at this dispatch box and pretend that there's an easy time frame or an easy answer as to when this will have the effect that we all want it to have. But we will bear down on it and we will make progress.
Steve Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At a time of highly stretched resources right across government, thanks to the mess in public finances that were left by the party opposite, I know that my constituents will be pleased that 75 million has been secured for further investment in Border Security Command. Does the Minister agree with me that it's a far better use of taxpayers' money than paying people to go to Rwanda or housing them in hotels at great expense?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it's advisable to try to deal with the causes of a problem, the immediate causes being organised immigration, criminality, as well as bearing down on the longer-term causes, which are often about political stability in other areas of the world.
Jim Shaun.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for her answers to the questions. I want to take a a slightly different look. And I welcome the fact that smugglers will now be treated using terrorism powers, as it is my firm belief, and the belief of this House, I believe, that the continued abuse of the asylum system is tantamount to invasion. Can the Minister assure us that those who come across the Northern Ireland border will have the same application of power under the terrorism provisions? Thank you so much.
There will be a border security bill coming forwards, and perhaps the honourable gentleman would want to serve on the committee so that he can make certain that the points he's just made are accurately reflected by the government in that bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the most colossal failures we saw under the previous government was the chaos in the Channel and the associated backlog in the system. And yet they seem to have come here today to tell the British people that they had it all under control. I wonder if the Minister can reassure my constituents of the serious steps she is taking to disrupt the gangs, speed up returns and end this chaos.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, his constituents can be assured that there is a great deal of work going on, more resources being applied, there's a lot more intelligence being gathered, much of which can't be discussed publicly. We are on it, Mr. Speaker.
Kevin McKenna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome the government's focus on tackling the root causes of organised crime behind these small boats, rather than the gimmicks of the previous government. Across Kent, these criminal gangs are fuelling a rise in organised crime, and in my constituency of Sittingbourne and Sheppey, it's pushing up rural crime, street crime, antisocial behaviour. Can I ask my honourable friend the Minister to ensure that the new Border Security Command works closely with Kent Police to actually make sure that the effect across the whole of Kent and, of course, the wider country is dealt with?
I can give my honourable friend that assurance. There are particular areas have suffered particular pressure from this phenomenon over the years, and Kent is obviously one of those, so I'm acutely aware of the pressure that he and the local authorities in the area are under.
Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last 14 years, the party opposite saw this become an increasingly growing crisis. They've spoken much today about how we need a deterrent. Does the Minister agree with me, though, that for somebody who's willing to get into a very questionably seaworthy vessel and cross one of the busiest shipping lanes on the planet, that a 3% chance of a trip to Kigali is not a deterrent? And in fact, the only way of getting a handle on this and dealing with this is to get back to where the problem originates. Waiting for people to get to the Channel is delaying a response and is creating the crisis that they oversaw.
Mr. Speaker, I agree very much with the observations that my honourable friend has made, and so do the figures. 83,500 people came across in small boats during the date when the Rwanda scheme was announced and the date of the last general election. The honourable gentleman says it hadn't started, but they began by saying Rwanda would be a deterrent just when it was published as a bill, and then every time it made no difference, they took it back and said, oh, it will work, it will work. It never would have worked. It cost £700 million, and they had budgeted, but not budgeted, for nearly £10 billion of expenditure by the end of that scheme.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that at the end of 2022, under the last Conservative government, the asylum backlog had reached 166,261, an 11-fold increase in 12 years, does my honourable friend agree with me that honourable and right honourable members opposite, who are very small in number for their own urgent question, are exhibiting a high degree of audacity?
They are, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps they should also be reminded that returns collapsed on their watch as well.
Right, so that completes the urgent question. Let the front benches change round.